my name's Tilman Robinson. I'm a composer from Melbourne in Australia. You're listening to some music from my record that was recently released. This first track is called Yours Dear Heart and was kind of made between two different continents, really. I recorded some stuff in Reykjavik at the studio that I was working at called Greenhouse Studios. I recorded a grand piano there and then kind of mixed it in. I went to the Banff Centre earlier in 2016 and found this really beautiful old forte piano that was tuned to A430 rather than 440 and recorded exactly the same stuff on that, and then kind of mixed the two together, and you get this unbelievable feeling of being underwater. It's almost like a chorus, like a chorus pedal, but more like an acoustic version. That kind of became the basis for this really warbly piece. There were many layers of piano that then came through a bunch of effects pedals that I took with me to the Banff Centre. Carting them across the world was costly, shall we say, but definitely worth it. Then there were all sorts of side-chained gates and compressors going on, and it kind of got to the point where I lost track of where audio was going, and I really had to almost set out a matrix of things that were being side-chained to other things. But yeah, it kind of ended up with this really stop-start motion, and I kind of like this idea of it being almost like a heart-stopping moment when the music cuts in and cuts out like that. And speaking of heartbeats, actually there's heartbeats in every track of the album. This is the only one where it's not audible. And what I ended up sort of doing, I think, was taking my heartbeat, which I recorded with a stethoscope microphone, and gently compressing the entire track with my heartbeat, so you get this very kind of gentle sidechain ducking of the entire track as it goes on. The album is a collection of pieces, really. The last couple of longer form things that I've done in Network of Lines, and also a commission I did for the 2014 Melbourne Jazz Festival, took this grandiose idea of long form concert works, of 60-minute pieces that were based around literature. And I kind of was thinking about that in the context of an album, and much as I like to think people would sit down and listen to an entire 50-60-minute thing in one go, I kind of thought, I don't even do that much anymore. So, and I know this is a little bit banal, but it's sort of a realization that I couldn't really expect people to sit down and listen to 50-60 minutes of music in one go in order to get what I'm trying to get across. So I was trying to make essentially a series of short pieces, not that any of them are inherently short, that could stand alone as compositions. There was a review on A Closer Listen, which is a blog in this kind of genre, I guess, that was absolutely adamant that this was a breakup album. And I kind of, I really scratched my head because it's not. Is there an element of mourning? Yeah, I guess to a certain extent, but not And in the case of one track, actually, quite literally, it is mourning. In the case of another couple of things, this kind of mourning for the world and the state that we're in. But some are straight up love songs, and I listened to it in one go, the record, and would kind of work with different playlist ideas, if you want to put it that way, and found a way for the music to flow for myself, but nothing's very connected, I think, thematically. 3 years ago, when I started writing some of this music, I had very, very limited production skills. I was still very much a pen and paper kind of guy. I didn't really have too much knowledge about recording and things like that, and over the course of the last 3 years, that part of my practice has changed significantly, hugely, to the point where some of the last pieces I worked on for this record are very much made in the computer with minimal recording and definitely minimal paper and pen writing. Yours, Dear Heart, the first track that we listened to, is actually the last piece that I made and is the biggest example of this, and possibly is sonically quite different to the rest of the record. So I guess where I was at 3 years ago when I started writing this music was definitely one thing, and only two pieces continue to exist from that time, and they are In the Always and Her Heart Was Warm Until It Stopped Beating. The first track on the record is called Where We Began. This actually started its life as a jazz piece, in inverted commas. I wrote it for the 2014 Melbourne Jazz Festival to play with an ensemble of musicians, and it kind of had more of a structured improv feel in its first iteration. So what was interesting was trying to roadmap this for a recording in a way that was still true to some of that improvisational style. And if you listen close enough, you can hear in the background of the mix there's great clarinet shredding by Joel Paulsen, and burn and violin arpeggiated improvisatory runs by Una Sveinbjarnardottir. At least it had a little bit of it in that, because definitely by the time I'd finished the post-production and mixing and all that kind of stuff, that feeling of improvisation had left, even though a lot of the production techniques that I used to make some of the textural sounds in the background were very improvisatory and kind of play in the studio. Yeah, I like to think that it's true to its improvisational beginnings, but yeah, you be the judge. I think Network of Lines was a really good indicator of where I was at that point in time. It was my first record. I was proud of the piece that I wrote. I was proud of the artwork. You know, I was proud of all of its moving parts. Looking back at it now, I can see what I was trying to do that was hampered by the way that I recorded the album, and also by the way that I approached the ensemble. That is to say that kind of, you know, if I had my way and I were to go back and do it again, I would have made Network of Lines in a little bit more of the same fashion that I made Dear Heart. And I kind of knew that at the time. I kind of knew that, you know, after we'd done the multi-track sessions of Network of Lines and I got into the space to do some of the post-production, I was really, really frustrated at how limited I was, which was by virtue of my own production skills, but also how we recorded that piece. So I look back at it with pride, and I look back at it very happy with it, but I can hear in it the kind of musician and composer that I want to be, and I feel like Dear Heart is more of a step into that direction. I think there was, you know, a simplicity to the musical structures and the harmony and the melodies of Network of Lines that has carried through to Dear Heart and probably become even more simple, to be completely honest. Compositional techniques that I used to write things in Network of Lines became more immediately ingrained in me and came out less forced, I think, in Dear Heart. And definitely some of the sonic ideas that I tried to create through structured improv, particularly in Network of Lines. There's these two tracks, the Void and the Iron Bridge, is that one? And then Shadows Gather. Those two were recorded as one giant improvisation that we all did together in the studio, and then, you know, I took it apart and turned it into different things and, you know, very much post-produced it and layered other stuff over the top. And that kind of technique of taking raw material and treating the sessions of the recording more as a way to mine new material is kind of how I ended up making most of Dear Heart. It's interesting, I was having a conversation recently where somebody was asking me, like, do you feel like that this is a big departure from your previous work? And I don't necessarily feel like that. I feel like the music has always been pointing in this direction, and I've always kind of felt like this kind of musician over the past, you know, 3 or 4 years, and I was kind of trying to make the jazz, in inverted commas, EDM work for me, more so than I considered leaving it behind. Network of Lines definitely had a very, and now this instrument is playing a melody kind of feel to it, whereas here the lines are blurred, you know, what becomes timbral and textural with the instrumental things and the sounds that I've blown apart from the originally recorded instrumental sounds make it a lot less obvious, I guess, in that sense. So this is Her Heart Was Warm Until It Stopped Beating. It was actually probably the first piece that I wrote, and in a sense is a bit of a companion piece to yours, Dear Heart, because it was written 3 years ago at the Banff Centre. I was sitting in my studio, which was essentially a hut in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. It was minus 36 outside, and I was sort of thinking about my mother, who passed away when I was 12, and wrote a very simple piano melody, piano sort of vibe. A couple of days later, we recorded it at the Banff Centre in the Teller studio with, I think at that time I was very much into Niels Fram, and I just met him and hung out at his studio, and we kind of sat there and tried all these things with felt and multiple miking techniques and all this stuff. which was fun. But then as I started to mix it, I later tracked the strings at Greenhouse Studios 2 years later, because I just sat on this recording for such a long time. And later when I tried to mix it, I started going really outwards. It's very extroverted, and the mix was huge and lush and cinematic and all of this kind of stuff. And the more I listened to it, the more I got a bit frustrated and annoyed at myself, because it seemed disingenuous. It's about my mother who passed away. It's not about this kind of grandiose statement. It's just about, a single mother who was trying her hardest. And so I got a little bit annoyed at myself and kind of thought, well, F that, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go inward. I'm going to go as small as possible. And so we found this broken tape machine at Greenhouse and just retracked everything through that, and ended up with this really broken kind of warbly feeling to it that I think is more intimate and serves the thematic material, as far as I'm concerned, serves it way better.